Podcasters can be head coaches now, so this might be my last episode ever. Is this the worst NBA draft ever? And we're going to find out if the new era of the NBA is officially here. But first, so I have the top 10 biggest questions going into the rest of the NBA offseason, and we're going to kick this off with number one. What the hell is Paul George going to do? So he's the biggest free agent this offseason, right? I don't feel like that one's up for debate. We can all agree on that. And there's been a lot of conflicting reports back and forth to see what he might be able to do. Things people are hearing, depends on what agent you listen to. Everything from he might just re-sign to LA because he wants to stay in LA to podcast, or he opts into his Clippers contract and then demands a trade afterwards. Think James Harden with the Sixers last year, except I can't imagine Paul George going to China and calling Lawrence Frank and or Steve Ballmer a liar. He could force a trade to the Warriors, or the Knicks and Rockets might want to trade for him. Maybe he signs a max with the Sixers, the Magic, etc, etc, etc. So let me throw my 2 cents in there, shall we? The Clippers could offer him 4 years, $221 million. And at Paul George's age, you would think that's a done deal if that's the offer that the Clippers send him, right? Well, if another team wants to max him out, that's about 4 years, $212 million-ish that he can get from them. So we're talking about a little more than $2 million a year that he'd be losing out on. And if he goes to, for example, the Orlando Magic, what he'll save on taxes will more than make up for it. So we can start eliminating some teams now. Number one, he's not going to the Warriors, especially if that has to be by way of trade, because the Clippers are not going to send him to another Western Conference foe that might actually legitimately be a contender if he goes there. I don't think the Knicks offer would just be enough. If the Knicks do want Paul George, we can go ahead and take the Knicks off this list because they just traded for Mikal Bridges right after I stopped recording. And apparently a whole bunch of other deals are being announced right now as I'm editing. So any trade that happens between Tuesday and Wednesday will either be covered via short or is going to wait till next week. So subscribe to the YouTube, Cat BK Beloved, or wait till next week's podcast if any big trade happens. Cool. Back to the rest of the video. If this ends up being a trade, I think the Rockets end up making the most sense because they have a shit ton of picks and they have enough young assets to where the Clippers will be able to sleep better at night. But if you're the Rockets, how far are you expecting to go with the core you have now minus whatever you have to trade for with Paul George as your best player? What is the ceiling of that team? Because I still don't think that equals championship. And the only reason you take a swing like that is because you want to work towards a championship. Free agency wise, another team that I forgot to mention earlier that can max him out is the Pistons. Let's be honest, Paul George ain't going to the Pistons, guys. I think we're all pretty comfortable in saying he's not going to the Pistons. No big free agent is voluntarily signing in Detroit if they have literally any other option. No shade, Pistons fans, but y'all know what you are. Come on now. And I know the Sixers are the most popular team you're hearing right now, but we're forgetting that James Harden and Paul George were just teammates for a year, and Lord knows what he's been saying about Daryl Morey. If he said publicly that he's a liar, imagine what he's saying behind closed doors. I genuinely think Orlando makes the most basketball and financial sense if you're Paul George. I already mentioned the tax break thing earlier. You get your max money. You could be Robin DePaulo's Batman because he's only going to continue to get better. And you can still have those Paul George takeover moments in the meantime if that development takes a little longer than you think. And as Paul George continues to age, because let's face it, what is he, 10, 12 years into the league now? Being able to lean on a Paolo to carry a lot of that usage rate just makes more sense to me and is a lot more reliable of an option than, let's say, I'm going to go play with Joel Embiid, who, if I'm lucky, gets to 60 games this year. If I'm lucky. Question number 2, how good will JJ Redick be? Now, I know in the press conference he said that he's done podcasting and he's done his media career for the time being, but there's 15-player podcasts now for current players in the NBA. If a player can have a podcast while playing, I don't know why a coach can't. Just me personally, I don't know why that wouldn't work out. Maybe someone smarter than me can explain that. And he also says he saw all the tweets and all the comments because JJ's sick in the head. So he has all of your podcaster tweets on a wall somewhere like a beautiful mind, and he can't wait until he succeeds to do so. Now, as to whether he will succeed or not in the merit of the hire to begin with, my problem with NBA coaching hires and coaching hires in sports in general is that we continue to just do the same carousel of flunkies over and over and over again and expect a different result. So I'm not opposed to giving a new guy a new shot. To the merit point, is this screaming white privilege? Of course it is. Is there more deserving assistant coaches in the league that would love to have that job and probably deserve it more? Of course, but that's not JJ's fault. He didn't hire himself. What is he supposed to say? No, you should give this job to Sam Cassell. As much as we want white people to be allies in that way, let's be realistic now, shall we? Also, side note, since we're talking about white allies, on the day I am recording this, there was a tweet alleging that a black woman said that while she was at Duke, JJ called her an N-word with a hard R. JJ obviously denies this. I don't know whether it's true or not. We will keep an eye on this. Right now, we're going to keep it basketball, but if I do find out that JJ's out here throwing the hard R out the window, scrap this whole segment. I hope he fails. Anyways, but we don't really know that much about JJ's coaching style yet. But we know how he feels as an analyst and the way he looks at basketball. He's a deep numbers guy. He said as much in his press conference, which is why he likes Joe Mazzulla so much, because Joe Mazzulla is big analytics and numbers guy and wants to get up as many threes as possible because the math says that's a good answer. Lucky for JJ, if he wants to go the whole put up a bunch of threes method, he has maybe the greatest drive and kick player in league history with LeBron James. The problem is, who the hell is LeBron going to be kicking to? The answer can't be we're going to kick it out to Anthony Davis as he's waiting at the three-point line, because that's a waste of his talent if you're going to have him standing there. The answer can't be LeBron take more threes off the dribble, because that's a waste of his talent. He's the best when he's going to the rim. So there's going to be some roster configurations that's going to need to happen in order for him to play this way anyways, and to, quote, modernize the roster, unquote, like they've been saying they want to do. So I think if you're a Lakers fan, that's the thing you really should be looking at, as opposed to whether a podcaster has enough merit to be an NBA head coach. Worry about the roster first, worry about JJ's merit second. Question 3, is this the worst NBA draft ever? Now, the day this podcast comes out, the NBA draft is literally today, and nobody cares. No one has been talking about any of these prospects in a real way, with the exception of Bronny James, but that's more so because people know it drives engagement than his ability as a basketball player, which is why I've been steering away from it, because I don't know how good he is as a basketball player. I know he almost died a year ago, and his season after that was weird, and he was on a minutes restriction all year long. I know the player I saw in high school is not the player I saw in college, so I don't know what to make of that. But I'll look at the Ringers mock draft, and I'll just give y'all the top 3 prospects, and most of you have not heard of any of these guys. I definitely should have practiced enunciating these names before I did this, but oh well. The Atlanta Hawks, they got him taking Zachariah Richer from France. Number 2, they got the Wizards taking Alex Sarr from France as well. And the Houston Rockets will be taking Reed Shepherd from Kentucky. Most of y'all just said who at least 3 times. And rightfully so, because we have not had a lot of NBA media really steering us in the direction of why we should care about these prospects outside of the son of the greatest player ever. So most of us don't. And all these experts are also saying they don't expect any all-stars to come from this draft. But the last draft they said that about was 2013. Which was headlined by Anthony Bennett, who one of the greatest draft busts in history. But that draft also had Giannis and Rudy Gobert, who both ended up being all-star, all-NBA players, in the Giannis case, an MVP. And Victor Oladipo, CJ McCollum, Steven Adams, a lot of players in that draft. So if this draft ends up being as shitty as the experts say, which I doubt, but let's just put it out there and say that it is, this will be a historically bad draft. Probably the worst ever. But that almost never happens, and there ends up being at least one superstar from this draft. If I had to put my money on it, I would put it on Alex Sarr. A French dude where it looks a little natural, reminds me a lot of James Wiseman. Hopefully, since he's not in the James Wiseman position of, we need you to be good right now because we're trying to compete for a championship, he kind of gets to cook in Washington if they take him. That's where I'm gonna put my money on, if there were to be one superstar in this draft. Next, can the Boston Celtics repeat? I'm gonna put my Celtics fan bias aside for a second. According to ESPN, the top 4 betting favorites to repeat as champions next year are the Boston Celtics, the Denver Nuggets, the Minnesota Timberwolves, OKC Thunder, and the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, for everyone in all the outlets saying, I can't believe the Celtics are the favorites next year. Duh. That's such a it's such a lazy answer. It's, hey, the team that just won the finals that's not going to go through any major changes going into next year. Like, this isn't the 98 Chicago Bulls where Jordan's retiring and Phil Jackson's retiring the next year. No, like, for the most part, this is going to be the same team next year. Minus one or two auxiliary pieces, or if Al Horford decides to retire. We never know. So, yeah, obviously they're the favorite. The Denver Nuggets were the favorites going into this past season, so of course they're at 2. Minnesota, I'm assuming that's a bet on Anthony Edwards is just going to get better. Oklahoma City, same thing with Shea, even though I don't know how much better Shea can get, but I guess we'll see. Improvements on the roster, and we'll get to the Milwaukee Bucks in more detail later, but most people don't expect that they're going to be that bad again. A little more stability, who knows what happens next year. The last repeat champion in the NBA was the Kevin Durant Warriors in 2018. And going into that second year, they were an objectively worse team. They were just so much more talented than everybody else. It ended up not mattering. Championship one, they were 67 wins, number 1 in the conference, swept every matchup in the Western Conference, and 1-5 in the finals. Next year, they were 10 games worse and were a Chris Paul injury away from probably missing the finals. As a Celtics fan, I would love to sit here and puff my chest out and be like, you damn right we going back to back. We about to be the Bulls of the 2020. But I don't know how realistic that is. I think the Jays are going to be better next year because they got the championship monkey off their back. I think Joe Mazzulla is going to be more relaxed next year because we're going to have less questions about him being a fucking weirdo and we're going to embrace it. Or this team can suffer from Pat Riley's disease of me. If for y'all that aren't familiar with Pat Riley's disease of me, when he wrote a book about those Lakers championships, he explained why they went from winning the finals in Magic's first year to losing it in the second year. Winning time covers it a little bit. How after you win a championship, every player wants more money. Every player wants a bigger role. Every player thinks that they played the biggest part in winning it all. And this team, the Celtics just saw, was built on sacrifice and teamwork. So if something upsets that apple cart next year, this whole thing could fall apart. So let's revisit this in October when we're doing the NBA preview, and we'll go from there. Question 5, what will be the biggest surprise trade of this offseason? So 3 of these I'm going to expand on later, so we'll get the obvious ones out the way. Karl Anthony Towns, Donovan Mitchell, and possibly Jimmy Butler. We'll get there. But I think the Chicago Bulls are having a going out of business sale. I think they're getting ready to tank. And Zach LaVine is the obvious next choice in that going out of business sale. And not only am I led to believe that because they've just been middling these past couple years, but also they just traded the most sought after role player in the league to a team with 1 million draft picks and managed to not get a single one. All they got back in the trade was Baca. And that's about it. I didn't even know we still did player for player trades in the league, especially player trades like this. The problem though is finding a team that's realistic for Zach LaVine to go to. That's second apron stuff, tax penalties and all that. I don't feel like getting into that right now. A lot of people said the Lakers in the middle of the season, but cap space wise, that's not realistic. And now with JJ Redick as a coach, it's even less realistic now. So if I had to put my money on it, I think he's going to end up being the Sixers plan B/C if they end up not getting Paul George or if they end up not making a move for Jimmy Butler. Again, more on Jimmy later. Question 6, what is next for Minnesota? So Karl Anthony Towns is definitely getting traded, right? 24% in the playoff series from 3 from the greatest shooting big man ever. He's due $50 million next year, 53 the year before, 57 the next year, and 61 on the last year on an option. Draft capital is kind of bare in Minnesota because remember when they traded away the farm for Rudy Gobert a couple years back? Y'all remember that one? But I think this is the most fun Donovan Mitchell team if they're able to make that trade work. Since player for player trades are back, nice little 1-for-1. Karl Anthony Towns for Donovan Mitchell. Make it happen. Mike Conley will be 37 years old next year. He is not getting any younger. We just saw the let Anthony Edwards cook for an entire series method is not going to work if you want to win it all. So bringing in another secondary scorer who can not only supplement Anthony Edwards' scoring, but dominate if he's being double teamed, that to me just makes the most sense. That's the T-Wolves side. If you're the Cavaliers, it's clear that Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell can't play together, and Darius Garland's representation pretty much said as much. Like, trade him or trade me. And if I'm the Cavs, I'm keeping the guy I drafted. Same thing with Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. I'm keeping the guy I drafted. So if you bring in Karl Anthony Towns, you bring a secondary scoring option that isn't going to take that many possessions away from Darius Garland because they operate in different spaces. and he gets to play that power forward role, kind of similar to what he was doing with Rudy Gobert, because Evan Mobley wants to do the center things. To me, it just works out well for both sides. Question number 7, can the Bucks have a bounce back season? Milwaukee was easily the most disappointing team of last season, right? You trade for a future Hall of Famer. You've had 3 head coaches in the past calendar year, one of which you fired in the middle of the season and got incredibly worse afterwards after overpaying for Doc Rivers. You're a worse team than the year before, and you still end up losing in the first round of the playoffs. Now, we can add in the context of Giannis being hurt late in the season, but if we're going to be honest with ourselves, they were struggling before that. I also heard Doc Rivers say on the Bill Simmons podcast that Dame Lillard may have came into the season out of shape because he knew he was going to get traded. I'm not here to say whether that's true or false. What I am going to say is older point guards typically don't get in better shape following seasons. So that's not something you can count on. Question number 8, how real is the Jimmy Butler and Miami Heat tension? So this is all stemming around Jimmy Butler wants his extension before the start of next season, and Miami's been pretty openly non-committal at best and flat out denying it at worst. Pat Riley's press conference comments and his exit interview with the media was what really pushed it to the forefront. I covered that a couple weeks back. But if you've been reading between the tea leaves in some of these interviews, even from Eric Spoelstra and some of the Miami Heat teammates, they've kind of been sick of Jimmy Butler's I'm only gonna play and try but so many games during the season routine. That's why you bring a Jimmy Butler in. But if the culture you're setting and the example you're setting is I don't care about the season until February, then what are we doing? And now you bring the finances into it. That extension, that max extension will be worth about $113 million on top of what he's already getting next season, and that'll be for an additional 2 years. So you're looking at a situation where you're paying $53 million for, at the end of his contract, 38-year-old Jimmy Butler, who I need to remind y'all, everyone's not LeBron James is going to be the same player at 38 as they are at 28. And Jimmy Butler has not hit the 25-game minimum to make an All-NBA team like it is now since 2018. So what are we really relying on at that point? So if Jimmy Butler ends up in a different uniform starting next year, don't be surprised. Question number 9, is the new era of the NBA officially here? And I need y'all to hear me and hear me good on this. Guys, the KD Suns, LeBron Lakers, and Steph Warriors will not be title contenders next year, no matter what they do this offseason. I don't care who they trade for, who they sign, it's over. The Lakers could build a time machine and literally go hire Pat Riley from 1984. It would not matter. It's over. Age is a very real thing, and we got to stop pretending it isn't. I don't expect these superstars in their mid to late 30s to go out there and compete with these guys that are at their peak in their mid to late 20s. And in Anthony Edwards' case, his early to mid 20s. The Anthony Edwards, Jason Tatum, SGA crowd, they're going this way. LeBron, KD, Steph are minimum stagnant, worse, declining. It's the young boys' time now, and I think it's about time that all of us as fans accept it. And then question number 10, I want this to be audience choice. What is your biggest question going into the offseason? Leave a comment in the description.